You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the Unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And we're joined today by Stephen French, host of the Unsolved Mysteries podcast. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm truly honored to be here. Thank you, Kristin. Thank you, Bill.
Are you a fan of the OG Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack? That's the first thing I have to ask.
You'd have to be out of your mind to not be a fan of the original. I can still remember being a kid. Why I was allowed to watch that show as a child, I have no idea. But I can still feel the shag carpeting in my family's house. I can still see some of those, the mug shots and the composite drawings. Mm-hmm. Yes, just absolutely hooked on it as a child. I don't know that I could have said, oh, I remember this, but I can remember moments of it and just being absolutely terrified by both the horrendous crimes happening and by Robert Stack's voice. Yes, definitely loved it and can't believe I get to be a very small part of its future here.
I was going to say, do you ever have moments when you think, oh my gosh, I'm the new Robert Stack?
I would never profane the legacy of the new Robert Stack. Terry Dunn-Muir, our incredible co-creator of the show, who I get to record with every session, which is just mind-boggling. She originally said, so you have to understand you're going to be the new voice of Unsolved Mysteries. Mm-hmm. That is going to carry with it a whole lot of things. When I found out that I had gotten the job, I did have a moment of that going, what am I doing? You're going to hate me. How is this? How am I possibly going to? It's obviously a very different thing. And fortunately, I'm not on camera. Nobody has to see my face for radio. But it's don't know how I'm supposed to do this because all anybody can think of with Unsolved Mysteries is Robert Stack. So, yeah, it is weird. It's very weird, but I think that we have found a good balance, and it's obviously this new thing. It's a new creation. It's the same heart, the same type of show. Never in a million years. I mean, that was from the get-go. We're not trying to imitate Robert Stack. You're not trying to replace Robert Stack. Just do your thing.
But I did notice, Steve, in interviews, and I was reading some articles about you, you did talk about feeling like a strong sense of responsibility. That was the word you used in following in Robert Stack's footsteps. Of course, we should be clear for the audience, Mr. Stack's been dead for a number of years, so he won't criticize the podcast as far as we can tell, or any dumb questions we might ask. You, in all seriousness, Steve, you talked about responsibility like you were taking on something important.
There is such a following for the show, and like the incredible work that you both are doing with your podcast, these are very serious issues, right? I mean, there's, of course, with Unsolved Mysteries, there's a bit of this kind of cult following and memes to no end of Robert Stack and the theme song. Everybody loves the theme song. But it's this really serious job. We're talking about real people who've had unimaginable, unspeakable things happen to them in their lives and their loved ones. So there is a responsibility to give those cases, give these victims the respect that they deserve, and also to keep up the mantle of seriousness with which Terry has shepherded this, for lack of a better word, this property, this show for so many years. So yeah, I did feel a great responsibility, but I also felt like I was being taken care of by everyone at Cosgrove Muir, and I thought it was pretty incredible that after all the success they've had, after being a TV show for so long, that they said, let's branch out, let's try a podcast. I'm sure it wasn't an easy decision to make, and I'm sure they knew that they were probably going to be up against people that are so set in their ways they can't imagine Unsolved Mysteries being anything other than Robert Stack in a trench coat. But I'm happy to say, for any number of people that are out there that don't feel like listening to a podcast, we have a really incredible group of fans that enjoy the show for what it is and are there for every episode and dedicated to helping us solve a mystery.
So how did you ultimately end up getting involved with the Unsolved Mysteries podcast? Did they put out an all call and say, hey, we're looking for somebody to do the pod? Or how did this happen for you?
Yeah, it was an audition just like any other of my voiceover auditions. That's for anybody who maybe knows me from the show or doesn't know me at all. I'm a voice actor. That's my job. And so just as I'm auditioning for the Unsolved Mysteries podcast, I'm auditioning for candy bar commercials and car commercials and cartoons and any number of things. Yeah, it was an audition that came in. I think it was in September of 2020, if I'm not mistaken. And it took a little bit of time. They sent a handful of scripts, nothing that was in our shows, but I think scripts from old shows that they had put in, some of that amazing Unsolved Mysteries writing. And so I glanced over it, and with my line of work, there's so much sort of rejection, or you do so many auditions that you never book, that now I've gotten to a point in my old age where I can say, I'll record this and send it off, and I'm going to stop thinking about it. And so I said, they're doing an Unsolved Mysteries podcast. That'd be cool. Recorded my stuff, sent it off. And then a handful of weeks later, maybe it was even a month later, I got a call back for it where they said, you're one of the finalists for this. And they sent over a couple of different scripts and said, we want to see a range of tones. Can you try here are some slightly different stories, and we want to see a range of stuff. And then a few weeks after that, all of a sudden I was on the phone with Terry Dunn-Muir talking about how they wanted to craft this podcast and what that would mean for me and how I could play a part in it. And that's when I had my OMG moment of what's going to happen here. Sure, I want to do this. I can't believe. But they just took such good care of me, and there was such collaboration from the start. And from the beginning, I said, listen, we've got to strike the right tone. I can't be Robert Stack. I'm not going to try to do an impression of Robert Stack. And like you said, my biggest thing was responsibility and respect for the subjects that we were talking about. So that's how it happened.
Let me ask a question, Steve. Back in the day, people in your field went into a recording studio with other people and recorded voiceover that way. Now we're talking to you from your home studio, and it sounds like you mostly do this electronically now. In other words, you're not typically with the people that you work with.
That's right. Yeah, everything is remote for me now. We were talking before we started recording here. March 13th, 2020 was the last time I went into a studio. I was doing a series, narrating a series for National Geographic. And it was right as everything was really starting to come to a head. And I remember I went into the studio and I brought some wipes, and the engineer had wipes, and we both looked at each other and we go, we don't know what we're supposed to be doing here. I'll wipe down your music stand and your stool, whatever. Yeah, everything used to be that way. Famously, for some of the people who aren't familiar with the voiceover world, there was may he rest in peace, the incredible Don LaFontaine, one of the famous movie trailer voices. He was known for, he is so busy and he had to go to all these studios around Los Angeles. And so the best way they figured out to get him to all his jobs was to pop him in a stretch limo and drive him from thing to thing. So glamorous. Today, it's not, the rest of us don't have that kind of lifestyle. But the technology has improved so much that you used to, if you wanted to have a home studio, a dear friend of mine, one of my favorite voiceover people in the world is the incredible Dennis Predovic, who I think back in the day was the only voiceover guy I knew. The guy, he had been an actor, and then he had this just incredible instrument, so he became a voiceover guy, and he was the only guy I knew that had a home studio, which at that point was an ISDN line, this digital phone line that you have to have run into your house, and with an expensive codec box and monthly subscription fees. It was this enormous task to do voiceover from your home. But using that ISDN, you could connect point to point with studios, and he was a very busy promo guy, and so that's how that worked. But now, your internet connection, as long as you have a hardwired internet connection, you can connect through these different modules like Source Connect or SessionLink Pro or IPDTL, and it's pretty darn good. It's pretty close to being zero latency, and so most of my sessions are done that way, or I just do them on my own. I'm the promo voice for The Mandalorian, and I think I've had 1 or 2 sessions where someone else has been on the other line. Otherwise, my manager just texts me a script because it has to be turned around so fast. Can you get in your booth? Here's the script. And then I just jump up here. I stand where I am right now, and I record this thing, and then I send it off. Wow. So yeah, it's very different than it used to be.
So is there any feedback then? There's no one in your ear saying, can you go again, Steve? Give me sexy, give me shy, whatever. That doesn't happen anymore?
No one's ever asking me to give them sexy necessarily, Phil, but yes. No, we have those remote sessions, and so that's when they can direct me. But I have been amazed at, depending on the type of project, if I'm doing something commercially, or like our Unsolved Mystery sessions, I'm talking to someone, they're listening directly in real time, and they can say, all right, let's try this, let's try something. The way that it's, the major difference, I would say, is that auditions now, I very rarely audition in front of people. We actors used to go into a casting director's office, have all your buddies out in the lobby, and you'd small talk with each other and lie about all the work that you're getting. And then you go in and you'd stand in front of a microphone with a pair of grimy headphones and you'd do your auditions for them. And so now it's all self-directed auditions. So that's actually where like this added responsibility and kind of stress that has been put on the voice actors is that you used to just get to go in and do your job. Now you have to be your own engineer. You have to be your own director. You have to be able to edit your stuff and maybe do a little bit of voice acting along the way. All those different little things now. But now I have to say, I take that for granted. I don't even think about the way it used to be. It's just, this is what it is. We still have relationships with all those people, all those incredible casting directors. And so you still have the relationships. It's just that you're not getting to be in the room together.
So when you're settling in to do an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, about how long does that take you? Can you knock it out in 30 minutes or does it take a little bit longer?
I'm proud to say I don't know if I'm any good at my job, but I'm usually very fast at my job.
Yeah, you're good at
it. That's been good. Thank you. I was thinking about this the other day. Terry and I I just can't even say enough about Terry. I don't even know that it's like we have time for me to talk about what this experience has been like with her. But in terms of the sessions themselves, we were just talking the other day after a session. When we started out back at the end of 2020, we were doing, if you listen to the show, I had these blocks of narration.
Yep.
And so we just go block by block and we record each of those. And when we started out, we were finding our feet for how do we want this to sound? So I was actually doing 3 takes in 3 different kind of tones for each of those. And then I think even up through the second season, then after a session or 2 of that, I said, you know what? I think we can narrow this to 2 takes. I think I can give you this and this. And I think it'll be about what you want. And she said, yeah, let's try that out. And then recently, after having done this for a season and a half, I said, what do you think if we just do 1 take? And then if you want to change something, we'll change something. If you want to try something, lean something there. And so now we do 2 episodes typically in under an hour. And if you listen to it, I don't have a ton of narration in all these things. It's mostly our family members and law enforcement. I maybe have 5 minutes, sometimes maybe it's 7 minutes of total narration for our show, probably even less. So if I'm doing my job, I can breeze through these things. If we're only doing 1 take, maybe there's a note. Can you hit this a little harder? Let's do a copy change. Terry is always right up until the last minute. She's hearing something. I say something. It triggers something in her where she goes, oh, you know what? That doesn't quite make sense. And she's amazing letting me say, if there's something that doesn't quite roll off the tongue, how do we want to change that? So yeah, we do try to breeze through it.
Are you ever hearing the other segments? So in other words, listening to the podcast, there's oftentimes, like you say, a family member, law enforcement person, whatever, who's also telling the story from their perspective. But you're also the connection from point A to point B to set the stage for us, the date and the time and the place and what happened. Do you ever hear those lines that come before and after you, or are you just recording your end of things?
Absolutely. Great question. Yes, I do get to hear those. And that's one of the further amazing things about this gig is how well I'm taken care of. A lot of other projects I don't even know. Some things are so secretive. There's so much NDA surrounding all the stuff that you're recording that you literally don't know what you're doing until you've maybe had an audition. Sometimes it's a dummy script. So I come into my booth here and 5 minutes before the session, I get emailed a script and I go, oh, okay, this is what I'm doing. With the podcast, Cadence 13 is so unbelievable. They have the show pretty much fully fleshed out. There are some edits that they'll make. There's some sound things that they'll change. And then one of their editors does a scratch narration for me, where he reads my stuff. There's a different voice. So there's like a rough cut of every single one of these episodes with another guy going, I'm Steve French, and this is Unsolved Mysteries, which is always funny. But so it's amazing. So I typically get those, my kind of span of time with each episode is we record basically every other Monday. And then usually the Thursday or Friday before that is when I get our 2 shows for the week. I get the scripts and I get the audio cuts. So then I'll listen to those a couple of times over the weekend before our session and then go over the scripts and run everything over the lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue, make sure everything's coming out okay. But yeah, I get to hear these episodes before anybody else. So I really have a great idea of what's being said, what the story is, and how I can best fit in to each of those things and what's going to be required of me storytelling-wise. What do they need me to push here? Do they need me to just move through this? And the other incredible thing is that once we get recording, a lot of things that are so time sensitive with other projects, all my stuff for National Geographic, everything has to be timed out, or certainly in a commercial or a promo, everything is an exact time. A secondary amazing thing, not only do they have this episode for me and I can hear how everything should be, they also very rarely have any sort of strict timing that I have to adhere to. They edit things around me and can, because I'm just in this pocket, they can stretch out music around me. It really is, I can't believe in terms of the actual doing of the thing, how easy they've made it for me. It really is like a dream in terms of all that stuff I was talking about before, the self-directing, the editing. I record on my end, I clean up things and send it off. They've just made it so easy. I can't even begin to describe how lucky I am to work on this in all facets of it.
Would it be bad if they heard this podcast and they realized just how easy they've made it for you? Would they use that against you somehow?
Exactly. Oh, maybe we won't send you the edit of that beforehand. No, and they're so wonderful. Chris Basil and Andy Jaskowitz, who are incredible editors and the main guys that do it. I just got an email from Andy the other day that was like complimenting me on my files and how clean they are and how easy it is to work with. And I was like, you make it easy for me. You're the easy ones. Yeah, so they're very special. Everybody involved. It's just, I couldn't be luckier.
So I told you at the outset of this that I'm a longtime fan. This is one of the only podcasts that I listen to that as soon as the episode comes out, no matter what I'm doing, bam, it's up and I'm listening to it. There seem to be the two type of episodes, the criminal case episodes and the paranormal episodes. Is there one that you prefer?
I can tell you before I get into that, I would say that you'd be amazed to learn that there are fans of each who think there are way too many of the other kind that we're presenting. So we're never going to get that. We're never going to get that ratio correct, I'm afraid. It's great. You look in the iTunes reviews. Enough with the paranormal episodes. The next person. Enough with the true crime episodes. Well, that'll be something we have to. Sorry, you can't please everybody. It's tough, isn't it? It's tough to say with this job that you have, that I enjoy doing it. You're talking about these really difficult things. I have this incredible fortune to work with Terry. We have a wonderful time together. We've developed this really great working relationship, everybody at CMP and Cadence 13. I don't particularly enjoy telling the story of a young person that's been trafficked or people who've lost family members. And even the paranormal stuff, I could say I have more fun doing those. Sometimes it's fun to add a little spookiness to a read. Even those sometimes are the people telling us those stories have not had a fun experience. So if, as I'm listening to them, if you can sense that the people telling the story are at peace or at ease with something, okay, maybe that's all right. It's funny. Amongst my friends, I'm famously a scaredy cat when it comes to any sort of ghosty thing or spooky thing. We don't have to go into details, but there may have been a forced visit to a haunted house when I was in college that garnered me a very nickname that I still am trying to live down, that kind of thing. We don't need to go into that. So, but I would say at the very least, there's at least a little bit of lightness to the paranormal stories that's different than the horrific cases that we deal with. Does that answer? That didn't answer your question at all, but
no, it definitely did. Like you guys just recently, I think it was like 3 weeks ago, it was the Demon of Brownsville Road episode. Scared the bejesus out of me, but also at the same time, what a great story. That was a terrifying episode, honestly.
Absolutely. And the stuff that I remember the very first episode we did was the Ball Cemetery.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, oh, great, this will be great. They're sending me these scratches. Why don't we'll turn out the lights. I'll lay in bed here. I'll pop my headphones in and I'll bone up on this. 3 minutes into that episode, never doing that again.
Too scary.
Never too scary. Never listen to these things with the lights off, people. Never.
Oh, that was a hair raiser of an episode. I remember that very well.
Yeah, those stick with you. All of these in some ways, we've done almost 80 of them now, and you remember little bits and pieces and details from each of them. And yeah, the paranormal ones, it just doesn't sit with me. Can I say aliens flying through the sky that didn't hurt anybody and everybody's okay and they just saw them? Those are the ones I love. Let's do more of those.
Yeah.
More of those. Nobody gets hurt.
So how often does the podcast result in an arrest? Because I know that you guys recently had an arrest made in a case that was featured on the pod. So I don't imagine you get to do those case updates very often, but I know that you recently had one. Do you have an idea about how often these cases result in an arrest?
I think we have had, my answer to that is in two parts. I actually don't know, if I'm being completely honest, that the podcast has been responsible for it. Somebody heard the podcast and then said, oh, that's my neighbor. But we have covered, I think it's 5 cases that have had updates. I think 3 of those were resulted in arrests. 3 of the murder cases. There's also people who listen that the incredible story of the girl with the S tattoo, Tammy Terrell, which through forensic genomics, they finally found out who she was at 42 years, which is just amazing. And also Kim Flint, who was covered in our story Missing from the Bridge. They finally found her body. There were no signs of foul play, they determined.
Okay.
So I think it's in terms of over these 2 seasons, we've had 5 cases where I've gotten to say the word update. So that's the goal. That's the whole point, and we can't rest until we've got many more updates than that.
Is there any kind of internal discussion with your team about updates? We are seeing, and of course we've interviewed a lot of people that are involved in really advanced forensics who are breaking cases all over the place. Is that part of the mix now, do you think, for Unsolved Mysteries, the podcast? Let's try to do more updates as new information is developed in some of these cases?
Oh, certainly. And any time that we have new information to share, I think it would probably have to be of a certain dynamic, of a certain large result of some kind. That's always the goal. I think and they also, it was funny the other day, we have incredible fans, and somebody sent me a news article. I think it was somebody we had profiled before, was involved in another, had been arrested for a separate crime, another domestic violence dispute or something. And I sent it to them. I said, one of the fans, and they said, oh yeah, we know. So they've got their ear to the ground, and I'm sure the Google alerts set up like crazy. So they're on it. So that really is. It's really the whole point. And I just commend Terry for, I feel like, I don't think I'm exaggerating. I think she can remember every case they've covered over the hundreds of cases and the decades that she's been doing this. It feels like when we're talking, I'll say, oh, did you ever experience that? She goes, yeah, I remember. It was like 1988. There was this case with this, blah, 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 blah.
Wow.
She has... Yeah, and that's what really struck me, it wasn't like I got on the phone with somebody and said, oh yeah, I've been producing this Unsolved Mystery show, this thing has been great, yeah, whatever, just say what. I mean, so invested, as if these are the first cases she's covered, as if it's the first. Terry owes nobody a rationale or a justification of her success and what she's done for true crime, for Unsolved Mysteries, for that being basically the first show to end with a call to action to incite viewers to help them out. The way that she has changed the landscape of this is remarkable. It's exactly the same today as it was all those years ago. So so fortunate to have gotten in with this team, and I know that her goals are never about creating content, creating a property, creating a brand. It's all those things, but it's really about the heart and soul of what she's trying to do.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
You had mentioned a couple of minutes before that it can be difficult to deal with the details of true crime cases, and we know that, of course. Do you ever have difficulty dealing with the material after you've been spending a long day invested in learning about these true crime cases? How do you deal with the difficulties that can come with being immersed in that world?
I'm a father of a 7-year-old boy on the autism spectrum, and we just did a case recently, Lured from Home, where teenager Alicia Navarro was disappeared. A few months ago, I was out with my son on a nature walk, and in a place that we've been often, and he's very fast, and it's a place we've been a million times, but I lost him for 20 minutes in the woods.
Gosh.
And it was the longest 20 minutes of my life, right? Of these things flashing before my eyes, and the unbelievable amount of possibilities that went through my head, and some very kind people were there, and he found someone. He talks a lot, he's verbal, but he doesn't always communicate what he needs to communicate or what you'd like to try to talk to him about. But he found somebody. He said, where's daddy? And I found him. The only reason I bring this up is that was 20 minutes that I'm pretty sure took time off my life, maybe a week or who knows how much. Yeah. I cannot imagine what people who have lost someone in their lives that when there's no closure, we don't know what's happened to them. I even doing these cases, even studying these things, even telling these stories, and trying to have as much empathy as possible, I cannot imagine what that feels like. Those are the hardest cases for me. The lost children, the abducted children, the missing children. Jessica Nunez is Alicia's mother, and actually reached out to me over Facebook when I had posted this. And I just think it's extraordinary what she and the parents of everyone that we've profiled that's in this situation, and even the families of murder victims. And I don't know. I don't know how people get by when this has happened. It's really, that was something that struck me doing the show that I don't think I'd considered, was listening to victims' families, to loved ones. That perseverance, that ability to wake up every day with this part of you that will never be whole again. And I don't wish to presume, but Bill, this is something I admire so much about you, of your direct experience with this. It's, I don't know, that's the hardest thing for me to deal with. And so I just try to tell these stories as simply as I can, as pointedly as we can, with the hopes that by us doing this, something may happen, something may help down the line. Yeah, being a parent, it messes with you these ways. So
yeah, no, it definitely does. And I think anybody that's been in your situation, even for 20 minutes, the horrible thoughts that cross your mind and that immense sense of responsibility that you feel as a parent. Now, my son is 24 years old now and in law school, and he can pretty much take care of himself, but I still worry about him every once in a while. And the thing you experienced losing your son for that short period of time. And then when you mentioned that he was on the spectrum and he didn't always communicate, I thought to myself, would he communicate what he needed if he ran into somebody else? In this situation, happily, he did. We've talked about this with the Colonial Parkway Murders. Actually, one of the 4 incidents in the Colonial Parkway Murders is still technically a missing persons case. That's of Richard Keith Call and Cassandra Haley. They're still missing. It's been over 30 years. And I remember years ago when we attended a briefing with the FBI, my father, who has since passed on, he actually leaned forward. We were driving back from Newport News, Virginia, back to Annapolis, Maryland, where he was living at that time. He said, at least we know what happened to Kathy. We knew that my sister had been murdered and that her life had been ended along with her girlfriend, Rebecca Dowski. But there wasn't any doubt in our mind about what had happened. There's the why and the who and all the other questions that we still have all these years later. But I'm not trying to balance out someone else's sense of loss, but I actually think the not knowing of the missing persons cases is actually worse, at least from my point of view and from my dad's that day that he spoke to us in the car about it. I think that is incredibly difficult. The missing persons cases, the missing children cases, I think all of us struggle with to do with kids. Even a teenager, you could make a case that teenager might have made some mistakes in terms of their judgment or whatever they were doing, not blaming the victim in any way, shape, or form, but the kids are incredibly difficult. And our friends in law enforcement have said the same thing.
Thank you for sharing that, Bill. It's fascinating. It's brought this whole new level of human experience to me that I didn't know. And so to me, that has been the most profound thing, is just listening to the cadences of the way people talk when they've dealt with this. It's amazing. I can't really formulate exactly how profound it is, but it's amazing.
Are there times, Steve, when you've said to Terry and your team, I got to stop or I got to go again because you get a little too wrapped up in the emotion of the thing? Remember, I was asking you about, do you hear the voices of the people who come before and after your narration segments? And you said yes, because I think that certainly helps in terms of your storytelling. You're hearing what this person said, followed by your setting of the stage, followed by more of their perspective or a different person's point of view on what happened. Is it difficult at times?
It certainly is. I'd say the one thing I have going in my favor, like we were alluding to before, the very unserious aspect of, I have a lot technically that I'm doing. I got to make sure I'm recording everything. I've got to make sure everything is working on my end. And we're doing this. So I do get a bit of tunnel vision with, okay, let's make sure we're hitting this and then hitting my marks as I'm going through and reading. So you try not to get too wrapped up. I always say to Terry, we have this bit of Joe Friday, but it's just the facts, ma'am. Let's not get too wrapped up in this, because there occasionally are times where I maybe have been, I remember in drama school, I was playing a very dramatic character and I really got into this monologue and I was down center stage and I was drooling and pounding the floor. And then after I was done, I expected the room to erupt in applause, and my very British director, the late Malcolm Morrison, took a pause. You were enjoying yourself then, weren't you? And it made me realize, oh yeah, it's not my place to enjoy myself. So I don't think I've had those moments of, we have to stop. I'm fortunate because it really is, it's my thing is I'm always, as the character of Steve French, the narrator in Unsolved Mysteries, I'm there to keep things connected, keep things moving along, be plenty of emotion from everyone else that you're hearing. So while I have to be respectful, there's a bit of a distance. And that was something that stacked it so well. You felt like he was holding us all as the audience, but he wasn't giving his opinion on this necessarily. He wasn't emoting. So that's how I get through it. But I find it's difficult to start these things. It's when we start each episode just to jump into this thing where in 3 seconds I'm going to start talking about something horrific that's happened. It's tough to just do that, but you just start somewhere and you do it. And I always try to remember by doing this, we are paying homage to those we've lost and the people that have been through.
So how closely interrelated are the TV series, the wonderful TV series, and the pod? Do the cases on the pod ever make it onto the show? And are we ever going to see anything from the show make it onto the pod?
I don't believe so. A big part of the reason why the podcast started was they had so many cases in a back people had requested that they look into, and there's just not enough bandwidth to produce all of those episodes for television. And they said, there's so many true crime podcasts. We're the OG true crime. Why don't we start a podcast and we can at least tell a bunch of these stories? It won't be a TV show, but we can get a lot of information. We can focus on one story at a time. And so it's a way of adding to that caseload, getting those stories out there, still in a beautifully produced way, in a very sensitively produced way, with that same focus and attention that Unsolved Mysteries gives to all of its work. But no, I don't think they will ever cross paths. And in fact, sometimes we'll be talking, Terry and I, and she'll say, oh, we're doing this for Netflix. We're doing this for Netflix. This is happening. And I've had very few very sweet people that are still obsessed with this idea that Unsolved Mysteries as a TV show has to have a host. The new version on Netflix does not have a host. I think it's brilliant. I think it works great. But there have been all these people that said, get Steve to host the podcast, to host the Netflix show. Just put him on there. He's great.
Get him a trench coat.
Give him the trench coat. This will all work. The tie-in, the Burberry shirt, everything's good. Obviously, a little bit more goes into it than that. And I think, again, I just think what's extra special about Terry and the team is that they're not afraid to take chances. They're not afraid to change how they do what they do. And of course, there's always this through line. But what a cool thing that they started out with the show decades ago. And then when Stack passed away and Dennis Farina took over for a while, it was a little different then. And then Netflix, a different animal then. And then to add a podcast to this, it really is. They're just, I don't know, they're brave in everything they do and with so much heart. So I just appreciate being a small part of it. And please, folks, nobody needs to see my face on TV. It's why I don't act on stage, and nobody needs to see this.
But you
find the one episode of All My Children that I did as a blackjack dealer, and you will understand why you don't need to see this mug, okay? We just don't need to go.
But you did start as a stage actor. You started in theater.
I did. Yep. I caught the bug when I was young and up in the incredible small town of Damerscott, Maine. I had Beth Preston, my incredible drama teacher and music director. And so I went to the Hart School in Hartford, Connecticut, graduated in 2003, a long time ago. And that was my goal. I was going to be a stage actor. And I had some very kind people occasionally say, oh, your voice is interesting. Have you ever thought about doing voiceover? Never thought of voiceover as a career. I just thought, oh, maybe you could do a commercial and make a little money to pay your rent every once in a while between your stage gigs. And in fact, even when I started, finally got a kind of real deal voiceover agent and managed to get my first kind of long running campaign right out of the gate by beginner's luck, I was out of town doing shows and I was driving my agents nuts because I was in Connecticut and trying to drive to Bristol, Connecticut to do stuff for ESPN, and because being on stage was my focus. And it was only later in life when Allison and I got married and we decided to have a family that, oh, it looks like the technology is such that I could do this from home probably, and I was getting tired of life on the road. And so, yeah, so that's where it comes from. But I think in my voiceover life, I love all kinds of narration because I'm still getting to tell stories, and I consider myself a voice actor. I'm always an actor first and foremost. And I imagine it might be a little weird for fans of the show if they follow me on social media to see the same guy that's talking in such serious terms about Unsolved Mysteries to then a couple days later post, hey, here's me doing voice as the moon on a Noggin Kids yoga show. There might be something weird. Oh, here's a Toyota commercial that Steve did. I'm sure there's a bit of a weirdness to that, but I hope people know the seriousness with which I take my job, and that it's all just part of this thing. I wouldn't have even been involved if I wasn't a voice actor. So we try to compartmentalize these things.
I was wondering something. How often do you get to identify yourself? Because I know you do a lot of different voiceover work. How often do you actually say, I'm Steve French?
I think this is the only time. I think it's the only time that it's ever come up. And when we first started, I felt so bad because I'm just part of what I love about voiceover is I get to be pretty anonymous and I'm behind the scenes. You just hear me. As they were starting, I'm sure there was a small part of them going, how do we make it sound like Steve French is somebody important that should be hosting this series? He's just a guy. He's just a guy we got and he's going to do the show. So no, not very often. I I think that's about it. And frankly, Bill, I like it that way. And the only other thing I get is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that old Canadian sitcom, Trailer Park Boys. There's famously a mountain lion that makes an appearance in the show, and his name is Steve French. And so I often have people responding to posts by Unsolved Mysteries that say Steve French, and then there's a picture of Steve French, the mountain lion. I know, folks. I know there's a mountain lion named Steve French. Yeah.
Is this an homage to you, or is that just a coincidence?
Oh, definitely not. Oh, definitely not. No, it just, for some reason, this beautiful mountain lion was named Steve French, and so here we are. I'm sure you probably have to scroll down on the Google search results past the mountain lion to get to me, if you're looking for me.
So if someone wants to put their unsolved mystery up for consideration on the pod, how do we would love to see our case on Unsolved Mysteries. How would we do that?
You can go to unsolved.com, as we say at the end of every episode, or submit a tip at unsolved.com. And you'll see up on the menu, there's submit a story. And so you can submit a form there with your details, and they look at all of them.
Really?
Those are read, those are looked after. They really do know everything that's coming down the pipeline, and keeping an eye on what they can tell, what's best for them to be working on, where can they best put their resources, will it go on the TV show, will it be a podcast? So please, never hesitate to submit to them.
There was a really cool show on the television series, a season or two ago, that was all about a UFO sighting in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, which is quite close to us. And I knew nothing about the case, nor did Pamela, my partner, and we go to GB all the time, and we just about fell out of our chair. It was such a cool episode. And I thought, man, this is like an amazing story. I've had a weekend house here for 25 years. We've been living back here full-time for 4 years. I said, I never knew there were a bunch of spaceships in Great Barrington. It was a really cool episode.
Isn't that amazing? I hear that a lot. People say, sometimes there's stuff that's really infamous and people know, but say, same thing. I've lived here for years. It's right down the street from me. I never knew that happened. In the Hudson Valley in New York, and we did an episode on the podcast, Something in the Sky, and it was about this enormous number of UFO sightings that was so big it was called the Hudson Valley Wave. I didn't know anything about that. Of course, it was before my time here, but it was the same
But
thing.
nonetheless, you'd
amazing,
think that something like that had happened and thousands of people knew about it, and you're like, how did I not know about this?
Yes. Isn't it weird? Which I guess is why it's so important that we have all these different ways to get these stories out there. We're covering, often on our podcast, we're covering stories that have been covered elsewhere. And I think it's important to just keep telling these stories. It's not like one place should tell them, that should be the authority. We should tell these stories as many times as we can with as many different viewpoints as we can until we uncover the truth about every one of them.
And the podcast also covers a lot of stories that I wasn't familiar with because there are interesting and sometimes tragic stories that have happened across the country. And you guys have actually shined a spotlight on a lot of cases that I literally knew nothing about.
It just feels really important to be a part of that. And I always enjoy when I hear somebody say, oh, they covered this on this. And so it always makes me want to go and look those things up and see how they told those. Or when we'll post about the upcoming episode and someone will say, oh, there's this info. So it's just, we feel like we're a part of it. We're certainly never thinking that we are the only authority on a certain subject. We're just adding to the conversation as best we can.
So what do you see as the future of the podcast and the show, if you feel like you want to speak to the show as well? But what does the future look like? Can we expect to hear the voice for years to come? Are we going to hear Steve French for seasons 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on?
I have no idea. I, of course, would be there with bells on. I think that's all up to Terry and the team, and if they feel that it's worth their time and effort, because they do put so much time and effort, and it's Cadence 13 putting a ton of effort into this. I really have the easiest job of everybody. I just come in at the end and tell me what to say and I'll say it. So I think it's a process for them of where can they best allocate their resources, and are they feeling like it's creating a positive mark within all of the projects that they have going on. I hope so, but at this point, as much as I do.
Do you think you would ever consider attending this true crime and paranormal podcast fest that's going to be happening in Austin in August? Kristin and I are going to be getting down there.
Yes, please come, please come.
Is that something you would ever consider doing?
Gosh, I always think of things like that. It'd be like the loneliest guy at the booth. That'd be like
that is so nuts.
It still is truly thank you for asking that. It is still so bizarre to me that I would ever do something that people would know who I am. I'm always so moved when people reach out to me and pass along a kind word and tell me they love listening to it and that I'm part of their week.
Yeah.
It's really extraordinary. And again, I always feel a little sheepish because I am not by any means a true crime expert. Of course, I'm learning about all of this and meeting incredible people like you who are welcoming me into this community. I'm so proud to be a part of it. But I'm definitely not a scholar or the best authority on a lot of these things. So listen, I'll never say never. I don't know who would want me to come down to Crime Con, but
everybody would.
Everybody would. Yeah.
You would have so many fans. It's crazy.
Maybe certainly no one would know who I am. I mean, no one would recognize me. I mean, that would be fine. Yeah, I guess you're standing in line. I guess I'd never have to put those words together. Oh, who are you? Standing at the front desk. Who are you? I'm Steve French with Unsolved Mysteries.
And then people will be like, whoa. Yeah, but as soon as you opened your mouth, people will be like, I know who you are.
Yes. Oh, it's so much fun. You should definitely come to any and all of it. Well, it's wonderful.
Really it's an incredible community, and I'm happy to be a small part of it, and it feels very important. I think that about a lot of the work I do, and some of the work I do is more frivolous than others, and I always put my heart and soul into it, but doing something like this has really been very special, that you were working on something. I'm just a voiceover guy, right? But I'm doing something that affects people, and we're telling stories from people who really are desperate for help and closure. So anytime I have a family member reach out, it stops me in my tracks for a minute. I go, oh, this is way more than just a voiceover gig.
Kristin, before we sign off, I think there was something you wanted to ask Steve to do. It's a little bit on the lighter side of things.
Let me get a sip of my tea here.
Yes, we are definitely hoping that you would be willing to say, I'm Steve French, and this is Mind Over Murder.
All right, let me just really quickly email my agents here.
Kristin told you we couldn't afford him.
Bill it to Bill Thomas, one in charge of all of this.
Exactly, yes, that goes to Bill Thomas, right, up in Connecticut. You said, okay, no problem. Okay, let's see. All right, let's see what we can do for you here. I'm Steve French, and this is Mind Over Murder. I never know if this is okay.
Let the record show that Kristin is freaking out. Don LaFontaine, whom I did meet and work with, would be very proud.
Oh, wow. Oh, we'll have to have those. I'll have to we'll do that off mic sometime. But my favorite thing I remember seeing Don LaFontaine do is, because he was so extraordinary, he came on Jay Leno one time. There was a bit where they had him come out and so that he could say something. It was like the fair balance or the disclaimer for a pharmaceutical thing or something. And live in the moment, I remember he messed it up. He tripped over his words. He did this thing where he kind of put his finger in his mouth and popped his cheek out. Just a wonderful ambassador for the voiceover world, full of great humility about what he did. He was born with a gift and it's paved the way for basically everybody else. You've got generations of us who've been trying to imitate Don LaFontaine, and it's so cool to see how that landscape has changed, see more incredible diversity of voices that are getting to do movie trailers and how things have changed. But I don't think no one will ever forget voices like Don LaFontaine or Hal Douglas and just the way that they created this whole thing. And so because of those guys, I'm proud to be a voiceover guy for whatever that means. I'm very proud of that.
Steve, this was absolutely wonderful chatting with you. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Mind Over Murder.
Thank you truly for having me, and keep up the great work. And, I respect so much about that you come to your work with such grace and respect and seriousness, but you also have a good time, which I think when you're dealing with such heavy stuff, you have to, right? You have to keep it light and make your way through it. So thank you. I'm still in shock that anyone would ever want to talk to me about anything. So thank you very much for having me.
That's going to do it for this episode of Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.
I'm Steve French, and this is Mind Over Murder.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Twitter or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.